The transition between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age was not a sudden break in history, nor a moment filled with noise, upheaval, or dramatic change. Instead, it unfolded gradually, over generations, like the slow shifting of light in early morning. The world that emerged from the Bronze Age carried with it centuries of memory. Memories of long-distance trade across the seas, the rise of cities and palaces, the slow shaping of laws and rituals, and the shared rhythms that had connected civilizations across continents. The Iron Age began not as an interruption to this story, but as its gentle continuation. In many places across the ancient world, the people of this time did not know they were entering a new age. Their daily lives continued with the same steady patterns, tending fields beneath familiar skies, preparing meals in quiet households, visiting temples where priests lit lamps each morning, and watching the changing seasons as they had always done. Yet in workshops near city walls, in small villages tucked between hills, and in the hands of traveling smiths, a quiet change in technology began to take shape. One that would eventually transform the ancient world. Iron, a metal long known but not yet mastered, began to take on new significance. Unlike copper and tin, the metals that formed bronze, iron could be found in many regions. It lay hidden in the soil, in stones collected from riverbeds, and in deposits nestled deep within mountains. But iron was difficult to work. It required hotter fires, stronger furnaces, and techniques more exacting than those used for bronze. Early attempts produced metal that was brittle or impure, unsuitable for tools or weapons. For centuries, iron remained a curiosity, present but limited. Then slowly, the knowledge of how to smelt and forge iron improved. This knowledge did not arise from one place alone. Different regions discovered different techniques at different times. In some areas, iron tools appeared in scattered forms during the late Bronze Age, their presence quiet and experimental. In others, smiths gradually refined their methods until iron became strong enough to use regularly. The Iron Age was not born in a single workshop, city, or kingdom. It emerged like fire catching in many hearths across the world. In Anatolia, ironworking advanced step by step. The peoples of this region, long experienced in metallurgy, experimented with new furnace designs. They shaped bellows that delivered stronger bursts of air, raising temperatures in clay kilns to levels previously unattainable. These improvements allowed iron ore to separate more cleanly from slag, producing metal that could be hammered, reheated, and shaped. Over time, this skill passed from master to apprentice, from village to town, carried quietly through generations. In the highlands farther east, in the lands between the Zagros Mountains and the Iranian Plateau, communities had been forging iron in small quantities for centuries. These early pieces were rare and often ceremonial, but they represented knowledge that would later spread. As populations shifted and routes of movement changed, ironworking traditions traveled with them. Elsewhere, in the regions of the Caucasus, along the ridges and valleys that bridged continents, people discovered that certain local ores produced stronger metal when smelted with charcoal. This knowledge, too, diffused across landscapes. Smiths traveling between villages carried with them techniques that improved slowly over time, each generation adding its own small innovations. In the Levant, iron began to appear in everyday life in gradual increments. Blacksmiths still relied heavily on bronze, but some tools, plow tips, nails, knives, were occasionally made of iron, their creation noted quietly by communities that continued their routines unchanged. As iron became more accessible, the people of these coastal and inland towns found themselves participating in a new technological world. even if the transition felt imperceptible. Across the Mediterranean, the shift took different forms. In Greece, where the Mycenaean palatial system slowly dissolved, iron tools emerged in simpler, more local contexts. As large palace workshops disappeared, smaller community forges became important. Smiths produced iron knives, sickles, and spearheads for villages that no longer relied on centralized storage. This reflected a wider change in society, from the grand, interconnected Bronze Age kingdoms to more decentralized communities adapting to new conditions. Even in regions far from the Mediterranean, along the Nile in Egypt, in the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, and in the early cities of China, the transition to iron occurred slowly, layered atop older traditions. Bronze did not vanish overnight. It continued to be used for ritual, for luxury goods, and for tasks where bronze's properties remained valuable. But over time, iron's practicality, its abundance, its strength, its resilience, made it the metal of daily life. With the rise of ironworking came subtle changes across society. Farmers noticed that iron tools lasted longer. Iron plow tips cut deeper into soil, making fields easier to cultivate. Iron sickles harvested grain more efficiently. Blacksmiths, once specialists in bronze, now experimented with new techniques, quenching, tempering, repeated hammering, to create blades with sharper edges and greater durability. As iron tools spread, agricultural productivity increased. Fields could be expanded. Forests could be cleared with less effort. New lands became arable, supporting growing populations. These changes did not feel revolutionary to those who lived through them. They were simply part of life's steady evolution, carried out under the patient rhythm of seasonal work. The Iron Age also brought changes to daily architecture. Wooden beams could be cut more precisely. Stones could be shaped more effectively. Houses, storerooms, and fortifications gradually shifted in design as new tools made different construction methods possible. These changes reflected not sudden innovation, but the quiet way in which metal shapes human landscapes. Communication networks adapted as well. The trade routes that had once prioritized bronze, routes for copper, tin, and luxury goods, began to reorganize. Merchants sought iron ore in regions previously considered remote. Caravans carrying iron goods passed through mountain passes, deserts, and coastal towns, expanding the geographic boundaries of ancient trade. In some areas, iron tools encouraged the growth of small settlements far from traditional centers. Farmers with reliable tools could work land in places where bronze had been scarce or expensive. Villages expanded into new valleys, along riverbanks, and into regions that had seen only limited habitation before. In this way, iron quietly changed the map of the ancient world. Yet despite these gradual technological shifts, the Iron Age inherited much of the spiritual and cultural richness of the Bronze Age. Temples continued to rise along rivers and on hilltops. Priests maintained rituals that had shaped generations. Myths remained central to daily life, stories of creation, divine intervention, and ancestral memory. Communities still honored gods who governed storms, fertility, sunlight, and harvest. Shrines flickered with oil lamps. Festivals marked the seasons, bringing communities together in shared celebration. In many regions, iron tools were incorporated into rituals. Smiths themselves were sometimes regarded with reverence, their craft seen as a form of sacred knowledge. The transformation of ore into glowing metal carried symbolic meaning, echoing themes of rebirth, purification, and the creative power of fire. In early Iron Age Greece, poets and storytellers preserved tales of the earlier Mycenaean world, stories that would eventually be woven into epic poetry. In Anatolia and the Levant, mythic traditions continued through oral and written forms, blending Bronze Age deities with new cultural influences. In Egypt, the religion of Amun-Ra, Osiris, and Hathor continued with enduring strength. In Mesopotamia, temples still honored ancient gods in rituals that trace their origins to Sumerian times. Throughout the ancient world, the Iron Age was not an end to old beliefs, but a continuation, an evolution shaped by memory, tradition, and the slow changes of daily life. As iron became more widespread, new forms of governance also emerged. Large empires of the late Bronze Age had fragmented, giving rise to smaller kingdoms. These kingdoms, though less monumental, were resilient. Their rulers governed through alliances, local leadership, and shared tradition rather than through monumental palaces. This shift in political landscape did not diminish the cultural richness of the era. Instead, it allowed new identities to form, new narratives to emerge, and new paths for societies to follow. The world that entered the Iron Age was one of diversity. Many cultures, many languages, many ways of life. Yet beneath this diversity lay a shared human continuity. Families still gathered each evening around the warmth of hearths. Farmers still read the sky for signs of weather. Children still learned the crafts of their parents. And the ancient connection between nature, ritual, and community remained unbroken. In the calm retelling of this history, the beginning of the Iron Age appears not as an abrupt transformation, but as a gentle dawn, a period in which the achievements of the Bronze Age quietly reshaped themselves into new forms. Iron tools, stronger and more abundant, supported this evolution. Human societies adapted, renewed, and reorganized, carrying forward the knowledge accumulated over millennia. The Iron Age would eventually become the setting for future empires, future philosophies, and future stories told across centuries. But in its earliest centuries, it was simply another chapter in the long, unbroken continuum of human life. Rooted in tradition, guided by necessity, and shaped by the steady hands of those who forged the world one day at a time. The earliest centuries of the Iron Age unfolded as a quiet continuation of the world that had come before. Children grew, elders shared memories, and the land responded to the familiar rhythms of planting and harvest. And yet, woven through these ancient routines, a deeper transformation took shape. One carried not by armies or dramatic events, but by the slow use of new tools, new techniques, and a new understanding of the metal that lay hidden in earth and stone. Ironworking, once the domain of experimentation, gradually matured into a practiced craft. Across Anatolia, the Levant, Greece, and the Near East, small forges glowed softly at dusk. Smiths bent over anvils, their movements deliberate and practiced. They worked with tongs, hammers, and bellows, coaxing the ore into yielding its potential. The process was not loud or violent. It was rhythmic, almost meditative. Each strike of the hammer pressed the glowing metal into shape. Each burst of air from the bellows brightened the furnace just enough to transform the ore into malleable iron. Unlike bronze, which gleamed with a warm golden glow, iron presented itself as quiet and subdued, dark, steady, and strong. It did not shine like copper or tin. Its power was not in its brilliance, but in its resilience. Iron tools held sharp edges longer. Iron blades cut deeper. Iron axes felled trees that bronze could only wound. Because iron ore existed in many regions, communities no longer depended on long-distance networks to acquire essential metals. The relationship between smith and village became more intimate, more immediate. This shift, though subtle, changed the structure of ancient economies. In Anatolia, where the knowledge of iron had early roots, the Iron Age brought new communities to prominence. After the quiet fading of the Hittite Empire, the Anatolian highlands filled with smaller kingdoms, Phrygians in the central plateau, Neo-Hittite states in the south, and Lydians and Lycians in the west. These were not sudden newcomers, but evolving cultures shaped by centuries of local traditions. They built fortified towns on hilltops, using iron tools to cut stone and shape timber. Their architecture reflected the rugged landscapes of the region. Strong walls, wooden beams, and homes arranged in protective clusters. Phrygia, centered around the city of Gordian, blended old Anatolian practices with new Iron Age technologies. The Phrygians carved wooden furniture of remarkable craftsmanship, shaped with iron saws and chisels. Their kings ruled from hilltop citadels, where storerooms, workshops, and shrines formed the heart of civic life. Though small compared to earlier empires, these kingdoms maintained vibrant identities rooted in local landscapes and spiritual traditions. Farther west, in the lands of Lydia, communities used iron tools to support agriculture and trade. The valleys of western Anatolia produced grain, olives, and wine, while hills provided timber and metal. The early Lydian kings fostered trade along inland routes, connecting their towns with the Ionian coast. As iron tools improved farming efficiency, surplus goods flowed more readily, supporting markets, artisans, and scribes. In the Levant, the Iron Age saw the rise of city-states that grew along the coast and inland valleys. These towns blended trade, agriculture, and craftsmanship. Their harbors welcomed ships carrying goods from Cyprus, Egypt, and the Aegean. Iron tools transformed daily work, strengthening the hands of carpenters, stonecutters, and farmers. New fortifications rose along the coast, walls built from stone blocks shaped with increasing precision. Some of these Levantine towns developed into recognizable kingdoms. Their names, Israel, Judah, Phoenicia, appear in later historical records, but their roots lay in the quiet centuries when iron began to shape life more deeply. In the Phoenician cities of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, shipwrights used iron tools to refine the construction of vessels that sailed widely across the Mediterranean. These ships traveled to Cyprus, Carthage, and the distant western edges of the ancient world, carrying goods, stories, and cultural symbols. The Phoenicians, masters of maritime trade, began to spread their alphabet, a simple, adaptable writing system that grew from earlier Canaanite scripts. This alphabet would later influence cultures across the Mediterranean. But in these early centuries, it served primarily as a practical tool for recording transactions, marking goods, and communicating among merchants. In the inland valleys of the southern Levant, small kingdoms formed, each with its own traditions and rituals. They built shrines, maintained herds, cultivated fields, and engaged in local trade. Their lives, though touched by new tools and technologies, remained rooted in ancient customs shaped by the rhythms of seasons and the guidance of their gods. In Greece, the early Iron Age is often described as a period of transition, a time when the great Mycenaean palaces had faded and new forms of community began to take shape. But within this quiet period, seeds of the future classical world were slowly sown. Villages grew along hills and valleys, each with its own identity. People built homes of stone and timber, gathered around communal hearths, and honored ancestors through small rituals performed near burial grounds. Iron tools played a practical role in this renewed simplicity. Farmers cut deeper furrows in the earth. Shepherds used iron blades to shear their flocks. Carpenters shaped wooden beams that supported new homes and communal buildings. Though the large administrative centers of the Bronze Age were gone, craftsmanship did not disappear. Instead, it became more localized, more connected to the needs of each community. In these early Greek villages, pottery styles evolved. The geometric designs that emerged during the early Iron Age reflected a society finding new artistic language. Patterns of lines, spirals, and shapes painted onto vessels that stored grain, oil, and wine. These designs carried meaning rooted in both tradition and creative renewal. Along the Aegean coast, communities that survived the transitional period began to rebuild networks of exchange. Ships once again crossed the sea, carrying bronze and iron goods, ceramics, and small luxury items. Though trade routes were simpler than before, they allowed new ideas to travel. Over time, these exchanges contributed to the cultural revival that would eventually lead to the iconic developments of classical Greece. Yet at this early stage, these changes felt slow, quiet, almost invisible to the people who lived through them. Farther east, in Mesopotamia, the Iron Age unfolded against the backdrop of ancient cities that had already witnessed millennia of life. Babylon, Assur, and other centers continued to serve as hubs of culture, ritual, and administration. The Assyrian heartland, in particular, began to reorganize during these early Iron Age centuries. Their armies, which would later become renowned for their scale, were still modest at this stage. But iron played a growing role in their development. Assyrian smiths produced iron spearheads, arrowheads, and chisels that strengthened their military capabilities. Farmers in the Tigris region adopted iron plow tips, increasing agricultural productivity. Temples continued to rise, their construction supported by iron tools that made carving and shaping stone more efficient. In Babylon, religious and literary traditions continued. Scribes copied ancient texts, preserving myths, hymns, and legal documents that linked their society to the deep past. Bronze was still used for many ritual objects, but iron tools quietly supported the practical tasks that allowed temples to flourish. In the Nile Valley, the Iron Age brought fewer immediate changes. Egypt remained deeply connected to its bronze working traditions, yet iron slowly appeared in workshops, first as small tools, then as larger utilities. Egyptian artisans adapted gradually, combining bronze and iron depending on the task. The temples, tombs, and settlements of Egypt maintained their continuity, reflecting a slow evolution rather than rapid transformation. Beyond Egypt, in Nubia, iron would eventually play a larger role. The rich lands south of the Nile possessed iron ore deposits that later supported powerful kingdoms. In these early centuries, however, the transition remained gentle, as communities adapted their metalwork with patience. In the Zagros Mountains and Iranian Plateau, ironworking advanced with greater speed. These regions, rich in ore, saw the rise of early Iron Age ceramics, architecture, and tools. Settlements grew in fertile valleys, supported by iron blades that cut grain and iron spades that shaped irrigation channels. Throughout the ancient world, the Iron Age did not replace the Bronze Age abruptly. Instead, both metals overlapped for centuries. In some regions, bronze remained dominant for ritual and elite goods long after iron became common for tools. Smiths often worked with both metals, choosing bronze for casting intricate shapes and iron for tasks requiring strength and endurance. This overlapping period reveals the true nature of technological change. Not abrupt revolutions, but gradual adaptations. Cultures retained what was familiar while embracing what proved useful, merging traditions with new possibilities. Meanwhile, the landscapes of the Iron Age world, its hills, plains, rivers, and coastlines, continued to shape the identities of the communities that lived upon them. Villages grew where land proved fertile. Towns expanded along trade routes. Shrines appeared at crossroads, on mountaintops, and near springs. Sacred groves offered places for prayer and reflection. Temples, though smaller than their Bronze Age predecessors, still rose in stone and timber, decorated with motifs that carried ancient symbolism. Across all regions, the spiritual world remained central. People prayed for harvests, for safe journeys, for health, and for the well-being of loved ones. Festivals brought communities together in shared celebration. Myths continue to explain the origins of mountains, storms, rivers, and stars. Even as new technologies emerged, the human desire for meaning remained unchanged. The Iron Age began as a time of renewal, quiet, steady, and deeply human. Traditions carried forward, new tools emerged, old kingdoms reorganized, new polities formed. Landscapes that had once echoed with Bronze Age grandeur now supported smaller, resilient communities whose strength lay in adaptation rather than monumental display. The story of the Iron Age is not one of sudden transformation. It is a story of continuity, shaped gently by the adoption of iron tools and the gradual rearrangement of societies. It is a story of families, villages, and small kingdoms learning to live within a world that had shifted subtly beneath their feet. It is the story of ancient people adjusting gracefully to new materials, new patterns of life, and new forms of connection. And in this still, thoughtful transition, the ancient world quietly prepared itself for the larger movements of history that would follow. The rise of new empires, new religious traditions, new philosophies, and new cultural expressions that would define the classical age. For now, the Iron Age entered softly, as dawn enters a valley, touching each region at its own pace, illuminating the land in slow, gentle light. As the Iron Age continued its slow, graceful emergence across the ancient world, daily life carried forward the quiet rhythms that had shaped human existence for countless generations. The grand narratives of kingdoms, metallurgy, and shifting trade routes formed only a distant backdrop to the lives of most people. In villages nestled among hills, in small towns along riverbanks, and in farming communities spread across broad valleys, life unfolded with a familiar steadiness. Most families lived in modest homes built from local materials, stone gathered from nearby fields, timber cut using iron axes, and mud bricks shaped with practiced hands. These homes were warm, grounded, and simple. Roofs were supported by wooden beams, their surfaces layered with thatch or clay. Floors were packed smooth from generations of footsteps. Courtyards opened to the sky, allowing light and air to filter into the center of family life. Each morning began quietly. Before the sun rose fully above the horizon, the soft voices of household members stirred in low conversation. A fire was rekindled from embers kept overnight. Clay ovens warmed slowly, filling the air with the scent of baking bread. Children woke gently, stretching beneath woven blankets, their eyes adjusting to the glow of dawn. Farming remained the heart of Iron Age society. Fields stretched outward from villages, shaped into terraces where land sloped, or arranged in long, narrow strips closer to rivers and streams. Iron tools played an increasingly important role. Plow tips strengthened the soil's opening, sickles held sharp edges longer, and hoes allowed farmers to remove weeds with greater ease. The presence of iron made each task slightly more efficient, though the overall pace remained slow and grounded. Farmers moved through their fields guided by the rhythms of the seasons. In spring, seeds were planted with deliberate care. In summer, irrigation channels were tended, their paths shaped by generations of knowledge about water's behavior across soil. In autumn, fields ripened into golden hues, and whole communities participated in the harvest, cutting grain, binding stalks, and transporting bundles to storage pits or granaries. Winter was a time of slower work, centered around tending animals, repairing tools, and weaving cloth. Livestock played a significant role in the economy. Families kept sheep, goats, cattle, and sometimes pigs. Shepherds guided flocks to nearby pastures each morning, listening to the sounds of bells tied to the animals' necks as they moved. Cows were milked in the calm of early day. Dung was gathered for fuel. Animals contributed to both economic stability and daily tasks, forming a rhythm of care that shaped family life. In many households, weaving was a central activity. Women used vertical looms, lifting and lowering threads with familiarity born from years of practice. The rhythmic movement of the loom created a soft, repetitive sound, gentle enough to lull infants to sleep and steady enough to calm the mind. Wool dyed in earthy reds, browns, and blues formed blankets, garments, and textiles used in trade. Pottery remained essential in early Iron Age communities. Potters shaped clay vessels on spinning wheels or molded them by hand. Their workshops carried the scent of earth and smoke as pieces dried in the sun or baked in kilns. These pottery vessels stored grain, water, oil, and wine. Their surfaces often featured simple, elegant designs, lines, spirals, geometric shapes, reflecting both artistic choice and a desire for calm, functional decoration. Metalworkers occupied a special place in Iron Age society. Their forges glowed softly in the early morning or late evening, casting hues of orange and gold onto the surrounding walls. Working with iron required experience, patience, and an intuitive understanding of fire's behavior. Iron ore was heated in small furnaces until it softened enough to be hammered. The smith worked with measured strikes, folding and shaping the metal gradually. Sparks rose and faded in the air like tiny embers of starlight. Blacksmiths produced tools for farmers, blades for butchers, chisels for carpenters, and fittings for wagon builders. They also created objects used in ritual: small figurines, decorative pins, amulets, and sacred implements for temples. Because ironworking involved fire, transformation, and hidden knowledge, many communities treated smiths with quiet respect. They were seen not just as craftsmen, but as keepers of a powerful craft that bridged the material and the symbolic. Markets formed another focal point of Iron Age daily life. In towns and larger villages, market days were held at regular intervals. People gathered to exchange goods, news, and greetings. Simple stalls displayed pottery, textiles, baskets, dried fruits, olive oil, barley, and fish. Merchants carried goods from distant regions: bronze ornaments, foreign dyes, tools with unique shapes, and occasionally luxury items brought from faraway lands. Marketplaces were lively, though never frantic. The slow pace of the ancient world gave each conversation space to unfold naturally. Elders shared stories of earlier times. Children darted between stalls, calling out to friends. Musicians sometimes played flutes or lyres, their melodies drifting gently across the crowd like a soft breeze. Temples and shrines remained central to community life. Even in smaller villages, local deities were honored with simple altars of stone or wood. People brought offerings of grain, fruit, incense, or small crafted objects. Priests performed rituals with calm deliberation, lighting lamps, pouring libations, or reciting prayers taught by elders. These shrines carried both spiritual and social significance. They served as places for reflection, gathering, and gratitude. People visited to give thanks for harvests, to ask for rain during dry seasons, or to honor ancestors whose presence was felt within the rhythms of daily life. In some areas, communal feasts accompanied religious holidays. Families prepared shared meals, offering portions to the gods before distributing food among neighbors. Ritual life was woven seamlessly into the daily fabric of the Iron Age world. In the early morning, Some villagers paused before a household altar. At the start of planting season, ancestors were honored for guidance and protection. When a child was born, elders performed blessings. When someone passed away, communities gathered in soft ceremony, lighting lamps and singing gentle chants to guide the soul onward. Travel during the early Iron Age retained the gentle pace of earlier centuries. Villagers walked between nearby settlements carrying baskets of goods. Traders followed familiar routes along rivers and coastlines. Messengers rode simple carts or walked long distances between towns. Over time, as iron tools improved roads and wagons, travel became more reliable. But the movement remained slow, deliberate, and attuned to the land. Homes in the Iron Age reflected both practicality and cultural identity. In the Levant, houses were built around shared courtyards. In Greece, homes clustered on hill slopes, their narrow paths winding between stone walls. In Anatolia, dwellings often featured stone foundations topped with timber and mud brick. In Mesopotamia, houses continued to use courtyard-centered designs. Along the Nile, homes stood near fields irrigated by canal networks, their walls coated in whitewash to reflect sunlight. These homes were filled with objects crafted through quiet, daily labor. Woven rugs, carved bowls, clay lamps filled with oil, and woven mats laid upon smooth floors. A hearth or fire pit served as the center of family life. Meals were shared around low tables or directly on mats. Much of daily activity took place in courtyards, where breezes flowed more freely. Children played with toys shaped from clay. Small animals, miniature carts, and simple figures. They practiced with small reed flutes, climbed trees, and learned the tasks expected of them through gentle participation. Girls often stayed near the weaving or cooking areas, while boys helped their fathers or older siblings with farming or herding. These roles, though culturally shaped, unfolded naturally across generations. In the evenings, families gathered as the light softened. Lamps glowed in corners of homes. The scent of herbs simmering in pots filled the air. Storytelling brought communities together. Elders recounted tales of ancestors, gods, heroes, or distant lands. These stories preserved cultural memory during a time when writing was not yet widespread in all regions. Some tales were comforting, others instructive, but all contributed to the shared identity of communities. Music also played a quiet role in daily life. The soft notes of lyres, flutes, and simple drums accompanied gatherings and rituals. Children learned melodies that echoed across generations. Songs marked the end of harvest seasons, the arrival of rains, and celebrations of life's milestones. Throughout the Iron Age world, the pace of life was measured not by clocks or schedules, but by natural cycles. Days were guided by the movement of the sun. Seasons dictated labor, rest, and celebration. Communities felt time as a living presence, slow, grounding, and steady. The early Iron Age, far from being defined by dramatic shifts, continued the calm continuity of human life. The memory of the Bronze Age lingered in traditions, rituals, and regional identities. Yet new technologies, new forms of local governance, and the quiet expansion of communities hinted at a future that would gradually unfold across centuries. Through all these changes, the essence of daily life remained deeply familiar. The warmth of a shared meal, the comfort of family, the steady rhythm of agricultural work, the soft glow of lamps at dusk, and the presence of the sacred woven gently into every aspect of existence. In the quiet unfolding of the early Iron Age, one sees a world grounded in continuity, where innovation blended seamlessly with tradition and where humanity moved forward in slow, steady harmony with the land. As the Iron Age continued its gentle spread across the ancient world, the vast networks of travel and trade that had once defined the Bronze Age did not disappear. Instead, they rearranged themselves into new patterns. Simpler in some regions, more expansive in others, but always guided by the same steady human impulse to move, exchange, and connect. Goods continued to travel across seas and deserts, carried by ships, caravans, and quiet footsteps along well-worn paths. In the early Iron Age, the world remained full of movement, though its movement felt slower, more grounded, and more closely tied to the rhythms of local life. Across the Mediterranean, ships remained the lifeline of long-distance exchange. Their wooden hulls, shaped with iron tools and strengthened with better joinery, glided across open water with greater resilience than before. The sails, woven from linen, caught the wind in soft curves, propelling boats from one harbor to another. While voyages were cautious and timed according to the seasons, they continued steadily, linking distant communities along the coasts. The shipwrights of the early Iron Age worked with patience and care. Using iron chisels and saws, they shaped planks from forests near the sea. Pegs and wooden dowels connected timbers. Tar and resin sealed the joints. These vessels, though simple compared to later ships, were sturdy and dependable. They carried pottery, metals, foodstuffs, textiles, and small luxury items, objects that reflected the subtle blend of continuity and change, defining this era. In the Aegean, Greek communities began rebuilding their maritime traditions. Fishermen ventured along the coasts, while traders sailed between islands that had been connected for centuries. Their journeys were less grand than the trade expeditions of the earlier Bronze Age, yet they remained meaningful, preserving the threads of cultural contact across the sea. Goods moved between island villages, coastal towns, and inland settlements. Pottery traveled widely, simple geometric vessels whose shapes mirrored the aesthetics of early Iron Age Greece. To the east, along the coast of the Levant, Phoenician sailors played an increasingly significant role in Mediterranean travel. Their ports, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, and later Carthage, served as gateways between inland cultures and distant seas. Skilled in shipbuilding, Phoenician craftsmen refined the design of their vessels, adding curved prows and improved rigging. These ships sailed farther than those of most neighboring regions, reaching Cyprus, Crete, Greece, and even the distant shores of North Africa. The Phoenicians became renowned for their purple dye, crafted from sea snails found along their coast. This dye, difficult to produce and richly colored, became a treasured export. Small containers of the dye traveled in padded baskets, exchanged for metal, grain, timber, and crafted goods. Their commerce carried not only materials, but ideas, writing systems, artistic motifs, and even new stories and beliefs that mingled quietly with those of the lands they visited. Inland, across the Levant and into the highlands of Anatolia, trade routes followed old paths shaped by generations of movement. Caravans moved slowly but steadily, guided by merchants who understood the landscapes intimately. Donkeys, and sometimes early breeds of horses, carried baskets filled with wool textiles, pottery, fruits, nuts, metal tools, and dried goods. At night, when campfires glowed softly beneath open skies, travelers exchanged stories of weather, harvests, and distant markets. In these quiet conversations, the knowledge of the Iron Age world circulated with a kind of gentle continuity. In Anatolia, small kingdoms engaged in regional commerce that supported both local households and the broader economy. Iron tools made woodcutting more efficient, allowing craftsmen to produce beams, furniture, and wagons that could be traded across valleys. Grains grown in fertile plains traveled to hilltop towns. Metals from inland regions, iron, copper, silver, moved to coastal areas, where merchants from the Aegean or the Levant exchanged their own goods in return. To the south, the landscapes of Mesopotamia remained tied to their ancient rivers. Boats made of wood and bitumen continued to travel along the Tigris and Euphrates, carrying grain, pottery, and crafted goods between cities. These river journeys formed the backbone of Mesopotamian transportation. Even as iron tools reshaped daily life, the quiet flow of these rivers anchored the rhythms of trade. Merchants along these routes operated within a deeply rooted tradition. They recorded transactions on clay tablets using cuneiform script. Their warehouses, filled with grain sacks, pottery vessels, and woven goods, served as centers of economic activity. When caravans arrived from distant settlements, scribes documented the goods with careful strokes of their styluses. While the world outside transformed slowly, the administrative life of Mesopotamia retained its ancient precision. In northern Mesopotamia and the surrounding highlands, the Assyrians began to expand their presence in trade. Their early Iron Age routes connected Assur with neighboring regions, enabling the exchange of metals, livestock, textiles, and crafted goods. These networks were modest at first, but they laid the groundwork for more extensive interactions in later centuries. Conflict was not yet the defining characteristic of Assyrian expansion. At this stage, trade, diplomacy, and shared customs shaped their relationships with neighboring communities. In the Nile Valley, the Egyptians continued to travel along their ancient river. While Egypt's long-distance trade was more modest during the early Iron Age compared to the grandeur of earlier periods, boats still moved steadily between the Delta and Upper Egypt. Merchants carried grain, papyrus, linen, pottery, and small crafted items. Occasionally, expeditions set out toward the Red Sea or Nubia, continuing the ancient practice of exchanging goods with neighboring lands. Nubian communities to the south engaged in their own networks, transporting gold, ebony, ivory, and animal skins along caravan routes. These exchanges connected Inner Africa to the Nile world, maintaining cultural ties that traced back to the earliest days of Bronze Age trade. To the Far East, in the lands of the early Zhou dynasty in China, travel followed patterns shaped by valleys, rivers, and ancestral domains. Carts and packs of goods moved between settlements. Iron tools helped shape early roadways, clear forests, and build bridges. The Zhou world fostered connections through kinship and cultural exchange. Ritual vessels, carved jade, bronze items, and agricultural products traveled along established paths. Though distant from the Mediterranean and Near Eastern worlds, China experienced its own gentle forms of Iron Age connectivity, quiet, structured, and guided by tradition. South Asia, too, maintained regional trade networks. The later phases of the Indus Valley's cultural successors engaged in commerce across communities. Pottery, beads, cereals, and small metal objects traveled among settlements nestled along rivers and plains. Their trade did not span as widely as it once had, but its steady continuity supported local economies in meaningful ways. Throughout the Iron Age world, the movement of goods followed a simple truth. Trade persisted because it met the needs of daily life. Families required salt, grain, pottery, tools, and textiles. Communities desired timber, metals, livestock, and luxury items. These necessities and desires created a gentle, ongoing flow of exchange that transcended political boundaries. Travelers during this time moved with an awareness of the land. They knew where to find water sources, where to rest safely, and where to avoid unstable paths during rainy seasons. Generations of experience accumulated in the minds of caravan masters ship captains, and local guides. They passed this knowledge quietly to apprentices and younger relatives, ensuring continuity of safe travel. Rest stops became familiar landmarks. A grove of tamarisk trees offered shade. A natural spring pooled near the base of a rocky slope. A small shrine stood at a crossroads where travelers left offerings, pebbles, food, or simple carvings to ask for guidance and protection. These stops formed the emotional geography of Iron Age travel, places where people shared food, stories, and the comfort of companionship. Trade was not only practical, it was cultural. A Phoenician pot might end up in a small Greek village, becoming a cherished bowl for generations. A piece of Anatolian iron could be forged into a blade used in rituals in the Levant. An Egyptian bead could find its way into a burial far from the Nile. Each object carried with it the imprint of distant lands, the artistry of unknown hands, and the memory of long journeys. Ideas traveled with these goods as well. Songs, stories, and myths traveled from one region to another. Artistic styles blended. Writing systems influenced one another, especially in regions where merchants needed practical means of recording transactions. Religious symbols migrated quietly across boundaries, merging with local traditions. These cultural exchanges enriched each society without overwhelming its identity, creating a tapestry of interconnected yet distinct civilizations. Even as the Iron Age progressed, trade had its cycles. Some routes flourished, while others quieted. Harbors shifted in importance. A town that had once occupied a central place in commerce might gradually become more local in its focus, while another settlement rose to prominence due to shifts in political or environmental conditions. But the overall flow of goods and people remained steady. Movement persisted. Exchange persisted. Human curiosity, needs, and relationships persisted. What stands out most in this gentle period of early Iron Age trade is not the scale but the continuity. Through change, through reorganization, and through the gradual adoption of new tools, people continued to travel as they always had, with quiet determination, a sense of purpose, and deep respect for the landscapes they crossed. As rivers carried boats downstream, as ships sailed beneath starlit skies, and as caravans passed beneath the shade of ancient trees, the world of the Iron Age wove itself together in threads of connection, slow, subtle, and enduring. In these threads lay the early foundations of the classical world. But for now, in the calm unfolding of the early Iron Age, the story remained one of steady movement, cultural continuity, and the soft, timeless exchange of goods and traditions. As the Iron Age unfolded across the ancient world, the spiritual life of its communities remained one of the deepest and most enduring sources of continuity. Though tools, technologies, and political structures gradually evolved, the beliefs that had shaped human consciousness since time immemorial continued their gentle presence in daily life. Temples still rose along riverbanks. Shrines still marked hillsides and forests. Rituals followed cycles of seasons, honoring the same natural forces that Bronze Age peoples had long revered. Across many regions, the transition into the Iron Age did not alter the sacred landscape so much as it renewed it with subtle shifts. The gods of the Bronze Age lived on in new forms. Ancient myths found new voices. Rituals grew more localized as political centers changed, but their essence remained tied to a long lineage of spiritual tradition. In Mesopotamia, where writing and ritual had flourished for centuries, temples continued to stand as the centers of community life. Ziggurats, massive step towers that reached toward the sky, still anchored the landscape. Though some older cities grew quieter, others maintained their sacred responsibilities with calm dedication. Priests and priestesses tended altars, poured libations, and recited hymns composed in ancient languages. The deities who had shaped Mesopotamian life for millennia, Anu, Enlil, Ishtar, Shamash, and others, remained present in daily prayers and seasonal festivals. Bronze Age traditions of cosmic order persisted, including rituals honoring the movement of stars and planets. In the early Iron Age, divination through animal entrails, star readings, and omens continued to play a central role in decision-making. These practices offered structure and reassurance during times of transition, anchoring communities in the belief that the divine still governed the rhythms of creation. Temples, though sometimes smaller than in earlier centuries, remained vital. Their courtyards were swept each morning. Their storerooms kept offerings of grain, oil, and incense. Their sanctuaries glowed with low lamplight. Within these sacred spaces, iron tools supported daily tasks. Chisels for carving inscriptions, knives for preparing offerings, and utensils for ceremonial feasts. Though iron was a newer material, its integration into ritual felt natural, as if the metal carried with it the strength of fire and transformation. In Egypt, the cosmic harmony of Ma'at continued to shape spiritual life. Temples to Amun, Ra, Hathor, and Osiris stood as timeless anchors along the Nile. Priests performed daily rituals in quiet sequence, reenacting the creation of the world and maintaining the balance between order and chaos. Incense rose in curling plumes. Statues of gods were washed, anointed, and fed symbolic meals. The hymns spoken in these spaces echoed the same poetic rhythms that had guided spiritual practice for centuries. Though the Iron Age political landscape in Egypt shifted with changing dynasties, the spiritual world remained remarkably stable. Families still placed amulets on children for protection. Farmers offered prayers for the rising of the Nile. Artisans carved small figurines of deities using iron tools to refine corners and details. In burial practices, people continued to prepare bodies with care, wrapping, adorning, and placing small items meant to guide the soul through the afterlife. The temples of Egypt served not merely as religious centers, but as cultural repositories. Their walls preserved myths, rituals, medical texts, and hymns. Their libraries held scrolls that guided scribes, doctors, and philosophers. Even in times of political change, these structures upheld the deep spiritual continuity that connected the Iron Age to the ancient past. In the Levant, spiritual life blended older Canaanite traditions with emerging local practices. Many communities maintained household shrines dedicated to protective spirits or local gods associated with fertility, rain, and harvest. Offering vessels, incense stands, and small figurines formed part of everyday devotion. Even in small villages, people honored their ancestors through quiet rituals performed at hearths or near burial sites. In the Phoenician world, coastal cities honored gods such as Baal, Astarte, Melkart, and Tanit. Temples stood near harbors, symbolizing the connection between maritime life and divine protection. Sailors offered prayers before departing on long voyages, placing small tokens in temple alcoves as gestures of gratitude. Rituals associated with the sea, calming storms, ensuring safe travel, and honoring the natural world, continued traditions rooted in the distant past. Farther inland, the Israelites and Judahites developed their own evolving religious identity. Their beliefs, shaped by local traditions and broader regional influences, emphasized ancestral memory, covenant, and ethical teachings. Their sacred writings, songs, and stories preserved spiritual reflections that would later resonate across centuries. While their practices differed from their neighbors, they shared the same fundamental desire for connection with the divine, for meaning, and for guidance in daily life. In Anatolia, The Iron Age kingdoms honored a rich tapestry of deities inherited from Hittite, Luwian, and local traditions. Storm gods, sun goddesses, and mountain spirits featured in rituals performed in open-air sanctuaries. In some regions, sacred stones or carved reliefs served as altars. Offerings of bread, oil, wine, and small crafted objects were placed with quiet reverence. Hittite myths continued to circulate orally and in carved inscriptions, preserving tales of divine conflict, renewal, and cosmic balance. In Greece, the spiritual world underwent a gentle transformation during the early Iron Age. While the palatial religions of the Mycenaean period faded, their gods remained alive in local cults. Small shrines appeared in groves, near springs, and on hilltops. Early altars honored deities later known in classical mythology: Zeus, Hera, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, and others. Offerings included animal sacrifices, wine libations, woven garlands, and pottery vessels filled with grain. These early Greek rituals were simple, intimate, and community-centered. Priests or priestesses led ceremonies, but household members also performed their own rites. Over generations, these local practices evolved into the richer mythic traditions and temple complexes that would later characterize Greek religion. But in the quiet centuries of the early Iron Age, Greek spirituality was grounded in nature, in family, and in the shared memories of ancestors. In the Italian peninsula, ancestral and nature-based beliefs shaped the rituals of early Iron Age peoples, such as the Villanovans. Burial practices focused on urn fields, carefully arranged cemeteries where cremated remains were placed in decorated urns. These practices reflected a worldview centered on honoring ancestors and maintaining continuity with the past. Small bronze or iron objects were sometimes included in burials, offering glimpses into daily and spiritual life. In the Iranian plateau, early Iron Age communities continued traditions inherited from ancient cultures, blending them with emerging ideas that would eventually shape the spiritual landscape of Zoroastrianism. Ritual fire, sacred spaces, and reverence for natural elements reflected a worldview focused on purity, truth, and cosmic harmony. Farther east, in ancient China, the Zhou dynasty cultivated a spiritual life that centered on ritual propriety, ancestral veneration, and the mandate of heaven. Rulers performed ceremonies honoring ancestors, offering bronze vessels filled with grain, wine, and incense. Divination continued through oracle bones, though writing gradually expanded to broader uses. The belief that heaven granted legitimacy to rulers shaped the moral and political philosophy of the age. Ritual practice connected communities to ancestors, nature, and the harmony of the cosmos. Across India, early Iron Age cultures maintained spiritual traditions rooted in ritual, chant, and reverence for natural forces. Sacred hearths, fire rituals, and hymns, preserved in oral traditions, emphasize the connection between humans and the divine. These practices laid the groundwork for philosophical reflections that would later crystallize in the Vedic and Upanishadic texts. Throughout the Iron Age world, spirituality remained woven into every part of daily life. It shaped birth rituals, guided marriage customs, and offered comfort in times of illness and loss. It dictated seasonal festivals, celebrations of harvests, rituals welcoming the rains, offerings for safe journeys, and ceremonies honoring the passing year. Shrines stood at crossroads, mountain passes, riverbanks, and village squares. These sacred spaces offered tranquility to travelers and locals alike. They were simple places, often just a carved stone, a wooden post, or a small enclosure. But they carried immense significance. People stopped to light a lamp, leave a flower, or whisper a prayer. These moments, small and frequent, formed the pulse of Iron Age spirituality. Even household rituals held deep meaning. Families kept small altars with clay figurines or symbolic objects. They offered food to ancestors, seeking guidance and protection. Mothers tied protective amulets around children's wrists. Fathers recited blessings before planting seeds. The home served as a sacred space, linking family life to the wider spiritual world. Music and chant played essential roles in ritual. Flutes, drums, lyres, and horns created soft, steady rhythms that accompanied offerings. Chants repeated in slow cadence soothed the mind and established a sense of order. These ceremonial sounds, carried through courtyards and open fields, connected people to something beyond the everyday. What unites all Iron Age spiritual traditions is their sense of continuity. Despite political changes, migrations, and the adoption of new technologies, the sacred world remained steady. It drew from ancient stories, preserved ancient rituals, and passed forward ancient wisdom. The Iron Age did not reinvent spirituality. It preserved and transformed it, allowing new identities to grow from old roots. This era, viewed through the calm lens of a sleep documentary, appears as a time of quiet reverence. Temples glowed softly under early morning light. Shrines caught the reflection of sunset. Prayers traveled gently between generations. And the gods, however understood in each land, remained present in the rhythms of daily life. The sacred world of the Iron Age was a living tapestry of myth, ritual, and memory, carried forward by communities who found meaning in the land, the seasons, and the unseen forces guiding their world. As the Iron Age world took shape, its architecture reflected the same gentle pace of transformation that defined the era. Buildings did not suddenly rise in grand new forms, nor did old structures vanish overnight. Instead, familiar materials, stone, timber, clay, and earth, continued to guide construction, while iron tools made the shaping of these materials more precise, more durable, and more accessible to everyday communities. The built environment of the Iron Age was an extension of daily life. Homes evolved from the traditions of the Bronze Age. Fortified settlements grew gradually on hilltops and ridges. Temples and shrines adapted to new social structures, and roads, pathways, and bridges expanded as trade and travel settled into new rhythms. Through all these developments, architecture remained deeply connected to the land and to the steady work of human hands. Across many regions, the average Iron Age home retained a modest, functional design. In small villages, families lived in single-room or two-room structures built from stone foundations and mud brick walls. These houses often had flat roofs made from timber beams covered with layers of reeds, straw, and clay. The rooftop served as an extension of the home, used for drying grain, weaving, or sleeping under cool night skies during warm seasons. The use of iron tools subtly improved construction. Carpenters shaped beams more evenly. Masons cut stones with cleaner edges. Builders carved door frames and window openings with greater precision. These improvements did not result in ornate structures, but in homes that were sturdier, more comfortable, and better adapted to local climates. In many Mediterranean regions, the Iron Age saw the spread of courtyard houses. These structures enclosed an open space at their center, creating a private area where families cooked, worked, and rested. The courtyard design allowed sunlight to enter the home while providing shade and ventilation. It also offered a safe place for children to play and for household animals to shelter. In Greece, early Iron Age communities revived and adapted architectural traditions from the earlier Mycenaean world. Homes featured stone foundations with mud brick walls, often arranged around communal courtyards or along narrow lanes. The influence of Mycenaean megaron architecture lingered in the layout of some larger buildings, especially those used for gatherings or ritual purposes. Timber roofs sloped gently, guiding rainwater into channels that fed the land or cisterns. The use of iron tools allowed Greek builders to carve stone more easily, supporting the early forms of architecture that would later, centuries afterward, evolve into classical styles. Yet during this early stage, buildings remained simple, grounded in practicality rather than grandeur. In the Levant, Iron Age towns expanded their architecture around fortified centers. Houses made of stone and mud brick clustered around citadels or high points in the landscape. Storage rooms, granaries, and workshops lined narrow streets. Iron tools enabled builders to shape beams and carve stones that reinforced walls and improved drainage. Roofs were often supported by wooden posts set in stone bases, creating stable structures capable of withstanding seasonal rains. Fortifications became more common in this region during the Iron Age. Towns built defensive walls using stones fitted carefully together, sometimes reinforced with earth or mud brick on the inner side. Gates were constructed with wooden beams strengthened by iron nails or fittings. Watchtowers rose at intervals along walls, offering vantage points over surrounding farmland. These defenses reflected not constant conflict, but the practical need for protection in regions where small kingdoms coexisted in close proximity. In Anatolia, communities built strong, resilient structures suited to their mountainous terrain. Houses often stood on terraces carved into hillsides. Walls made of large stones or timber frames supported mud brick infill. Central hearths provided warmth during colder seasons. Many Anatolian towns incorporated fortifications into their design, building gates, towers, and stone walls along the natural contours of the land. The legacy of the Hittites remained visible in the construction techniques of the Neo-Hittite states. Stone orthostats, large, upright slabs carved with images of deities, rulers, or animals, decorated the entrances of some buildings. Iron chisels allowed artisans to shape these stones with increasing precision, though the artistic style stayed rooted in older traditions. Farther south, in Egypt, architectural practices remained deeply tied to the Nile. Homes continued to be built from mud brick, a material well suited to the region's climate. Larger residences had multiple rooms, open courtyards, and shaded areas designed to capture breezes. Temples remained monumental, constructed from limestone or sandstone with columns and carved reliefs that depicted gods, pharaohs, and ritual scenes. Even in the Iron Age, Egyptian monumental architecture retained its quiet majesty. Temples glowed under the desert sun, their shadows stretching across the sand. Court officials, priests, and workers maintained these sacred precincts using iron chisels, mallets, and saws, tools that made restoration more efficient and durable. The construction of new temples slowed compared to earlier centuries, but the upkeep of existing structures remained essential, preserving spiritual continuity. In Mesopotamia, architecture reflected the long-standing use of mud brick and baked brick. Houses featured courtyards, storage rooms, and small shrines. Temples rose above cityscapes, their stepped platforms reaffirming the ancient connection between humans and the divine. Iron tools supported brick production and stone carving, allowing workers to achieve finer shapes and more stable foundations. As the Iron Age progressed, some Mesopotamian cities expanded their defensive walls. Builders used fired bricks bound with bitumen, strengthening structures to withstand weather and the test of time. Streets were laid out with greater regularity, lined with drainage channels shaped by iron tools. In the highlands to the east, early Iranian communities built structures that combined stone foundations with wooden frames. Storage pits, workshops, and domestic buildings reflected a practical, grounded aesthetic. Temples in these regions often featured open-air designs, aligning with traditions that emphasized fire, light, and the natural world. In India, early Iron Age cultures built homes of wood, thatch, and mud, arranged in layouts that reflected family and community ties. Some settlements featured fortified walls or ditches, suggesting a need for protection against wild animals or occasional conflict. Ritual spaces included fire altars and courtyards for ceremonies. Iron tools supported agriculture and craftsmanship, subtly shaping the built environment. Across China, the early Zhou dynasty constructed palaces, ancestral halls, and ritual platforms using timber, rammed earth, and stone. Iron tools improved carpentry and soil compaction, allowing builders to lay stronger foundations for walls and towers. Dwellings in rural areas remained simple. Wooden frames filled with earth or thatch, arranged around communal courtyards. Elite compounds grew more complex, with multiple buildings connected by paths and courtyards in harmonious layouts. Throughout the Iron Age world, the built environment was deeply intertwined with natural landscapes. Many settlements were placed on elevated ground, hilltops, ridges, or plateaus, offering protection and visibility. Others clustered near rivers, taking advantage of fertile land and easy access to water. Roads and pathways followed geographic contours, curving along riverbanks, crossing mountain passes, and winding between valleys. As iron tools became more common, roads improved gradually. Builders used iron picks to break stone, clearing paths more effectively than before. Wooden planks reinforced bridges. Stone-lined steps were carved into hillsides to stabilize routes. Caravans and travelers benefited from these subtle enhancements, though the roads still retained the humble simplicity of ancient travel. Temples and sacred spaces also evolved gently during the Iron Age. In many regions, religious architecture became more localized. Small shrines were built near springs, in groves, or on hilltops. These structures were simple: stone enclosures, wooden posts, or small altars. But they held profound significance. People visited them during seasonal rituals, offerings in hand, guided by traditions older than memory. Larger temples, where they existed, continued to reflect the spiritual grandeur of earlier eras. In Greece, the early Iron Age saw the beginnings of architectural styles that would later define classical temples. Wooden columns, simple porches, and rectangular layouts provided the foundation for future developments. But during this era, temples remained modest, centers of community worship rather than monumental displays. In the Levant, temples often featured wide courtyards and inner sanctuaries. Their walls were decorated with simple carvings or painted symbols. Iron tools allowed builders to shape wooden beams and carve stones more effectively, supporting structures that blended practicality with sacred purpose. In the Western Mediterranean, early Iron Age peoples constructed huts, storage pits, and ceremonial spaces using locally available materials: oak, pine, thatch, and stone. Hill forts emerged in some regions, their ramparts built from earth and stone. These fortified settlements overlooked valleys and rivers, serving as both defensive and communal centers. What unites Iron Age architecture across cultures is not its grandeur, but its grounded nature. Buildings remained close to the land, shaped by local needs and local materials. Iron tools did not transform architecture overnight, but they quietly improved its quality, allowing communities to build more stable homes, more resilient walls, and more precise religious structures. This gentle evolution reflects the broader story of the Iron Age. A world rooted in tradition, yet shaped gradually by new tools and new possibilities. Families continued to live as their ancestors had, centered around hearths, courtyards, and communal gatherings. Builders continued to honor the land, constructing homes that blended with the contours of hills and valleys. Temples continued to serve as spaces of reflection, offering a bridge between human life and the divine. And through all these developments, the built world of the Iron Age remained a quiet reflection of human resilience, creativity, and connection to the earth. A world where architecture did not seek to dominate the landscape, but to live harmoniously within it. As the Iron Age matured across continents, new cultural identities began to take shape, quietly, gradually, and in harmony with the landscapes from which they emerged. These cultures did not suddenly appear. They grew from older traditions, shaped by local conditions, ancestral memory, and the slow spread of new tools and technologies. Across Europe, the Mediterranean, and the Near East, communities adapted ironworking to their needs, formed fresh artistic expressions, and developed ways of life that reflected both innovation and continuity. In these early Iron Age centuries, the world did not yet know the empires, kingdoms, and philosophies that would arise later. Instead, it was a mosaic of developing cultures, each one refining its identity, cultivating its rituals, shaping its artistic language, and settling into the landscapes they would call home for generations. Through the calm unfolding of this era, distinct societies emerged. The Celts in Europe, the Scythians in the steppe, the Phoenicians along the coast, the Israelites in the southern Levant, and the Greeks in the Aegean world. In the forested lands of Central and Western Europe, Iron Age communities gradually developed the cultural traits that would later be known as Celtic. These early groups lived among dense woodlands, rolling hills, and broad rivers. Their settlements were often built on hilltops, surrounded by timber palisades or simple earthworks that blended with the terrain. Iron tools helped them clear forests, cultivate land, and craft the distinctive objects that characterized their daily lives. These early Celts were skilled metalworkers. Iron knives, swords, sickles, and spearheads flowed from their forges. Bronze continued to be used for decoration. Torques, brooches, and arm rings shaped with spirals and intricate patterns. The soft glow of bronze combined beautifully with the deeper resilience of iron, creating an artistic style rooted in both strength and elegance. Homes were circular or rectangular, with timber frames and thatched roofs. Families gathered around central hearths where food was prepared and stories were told. The Celts revered natural spaces, sacred groves, rivers, springs, and hills. Rituals honored the cycles of nature, the changing seasons, and the spirits believed to inhabit the land. Offerings were placed in water or buried in pits, symbolizing gratitude and connection to the earth. Though these early Celtic communities were far from the later grandeur of Celtic chieftains and warriors, they carried within them the seeds of a culture defined by craftsmanship, nature, and deep spiritual reverence. To the east, across the great Eurasian steppe, another Iron Age culture emerged with its own distinct identity: the Scythians. These nomadic peoples lived in a world of open grasslands stretching beyond the horizon. Here, the wind shaped the land, and the rhythm of life followed the movement of herds across vast distances. The Scythians became renowned for their mastery of horseback riding. Their early Iron Age ancestors domesticated horses not merely as animals of burden, but as partners in daily travel, hunting, and warfare. Life on the steppe demanded mobility, and the horse provided it. Scythian riders moved with the land, guiding their herds through seasonal pastures, following routes familiar to generations. Their homes were portable, yurts made of felt and wood that could be moved with ease. Iron tools supported their livelihood, enabling them to shape wooden frames, repair wagons, and craft weapons. The Scythians developed powerful bows and finely balanced iron arrowheads, tools well suited for hunting and defense. Scythian art expressed the natural world through stylized animals: deer, eagles, panthers, and horses. These figures appeared on gold ornaments, wooden carvings, and leather decorations. Their spiritual world was deeply connected to nature. Rituals honored the sky, the earth, and ancestral spirits. Burials often included intricate objects that reflected the importance of identity, lineage, and the journey into the afterlife. Though their society was mobile, life among Scythian communities moved at a gentle pace. Riders tending herds, weaving felt, preparing meals, and gathering around fires beneath expansive skies. Their quiet resilience echoed across the steppe, forming one of the distinctive cultures of the Iron Age. Along the eastern Mediterranean coast, the Phoenicians developed a vibrant Iron Age culture shaped by the sea. Their cities, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, and later Carthage, flourished as centers of maritime trade. The Phoenicians inherited seafaring traditions from earlier Bronze Age ancestors, but iron tools allowed them to refine shipbuilding and expand their reach. Phoenician ships were strong, balanced, and capable of traveling great distances. Their sails caught the winds of the Mediterranean, carrying goods from port to port. Phoenician merchants traded timber, purple dye, pottery, glass, and finely crafted metal objects. From their harbors, ships ventured west to Cyprus, Greece, Sicily, Sardinia, and eventually northern Africa and the Iberian Peninsula. The Phoenicians developed an alphabet, simple, practical, and easy to learn, that spread quickly among neighboring cultures. This writing system, born from the needs of trade, would later influence Greek writing, and through it, the alphabets used across much of the world today. Spiritual life in Phoenician cities centered on temples dedicated to deities such as Baal, Astarte, Melkart, and Tanit. Rituals involved incense, offerings, processions, and celebrations tied to the cycles of nature and the sea. Families maintained household shrines, while public rites strengthened communal identity. Cities were built with narrow streets, stone houses, and courtyards. Harbor walls supported docks where merchants loaded and unloaded goods. Nighttime in a Phoenician city carried the soft glow of oil lamps and the gentle sound of waves against moored ships, a quiet rhythm that defined life along this ancient coast. South of the Phoenician world, in the hill country of the Levant, the Israelites developed a distinct Iron Age identity shaped by ancestral traditions, local landscapes, and emerging forms of community leadership. Villages spread across hillsides, composed of stone-built houses with shared courtyards and communal storage facilities. Iron tools supported farming on terraced slopes. Plows, hoes, and sickles, helping families cultivate barley, wheat, olives, and grapes. The Israelites maintained a rich tradition of storytelling, poetry, and song. Their sacred narratives, preserved in oral form during this era, reflected a deep sense of ancestral memory and covenant identity. Rituals emphasized moral teachings, community unity, and reverence for a single divine presence. While archaeological and textual histories intertwine in complex ways, what is clear is that spiritual life held a central place in this culture. Household altars, community gatherings, and seasonal festivals formed the basis of religious life. The early Iron Age Israelites built simple shrines before later constructing more formal temples. Their practices emphasized ethical living, remembrance, and continuity with past generations. As villages grew into towns, new forms of leadership emerged: chiefs, elders, judges, and eventually kings. Yet the everyday life of most Israelites remained grounded in farming, small-scale trade, and the rituals that honored family and faith. In the lands surrounding the Aegean Sea, early Iron Age Greek communities lived in modest villages that preserved Mycenaean traditions while gradually developing new social forms. These centuries, though simple in appearance, marked the beginning of the cultural foundations that would later shape classical Greece. Homes were built of stone and timber, clustered along slopes or near small harbors. Families worked the land, tended olive groves, raised goats and sheep, and fished along rocky coasts. Iron tools supported agriculture, carpentry, and craftwork, allowing communities to rebuild after the fragmentation of the earlier Mycenaean world. Pottery evolved into the geometric style. Clean lines, circles, and intricate patterns painted in dark pigments on pale clay. This style reflected a new artistic identity emerging slowly through daily craft. Religious practices remained tied to nature. Hilltop sanctuaries honored gods associated with sky, storms, fertility, and protection. Shrines appeared near springs, groves, and natural formations. Over time, these local cults would grow into the more structured Olympian religion of later centuries. But during the early Iron Age, they remained intimate and community-centered. As generations passed, villages grew in size and complexity. Some became fortified hill towns. Others developed marketplaces or central gathering spaces. These early forms laid the groundwork for the polis, the city-state, that would eventually become the hallmark of Greek civilization. Though these cultures differed in language, tradition, and landscape, their daily life carried the same gentle rhythms. Families gathering around hearths, farmers tending fields, artisans shaping wood, clay, and metal, children learning through repetition and play, communities honoring the seasons, travelers moving between regions with quiet purpose. Across continents, the Iron Age was not defined by sudden upheaval, but by human continuity, local traditions enriched by gradual innovation. The Celts shaped a world of forests and rivers. The Scythians embraced the freedom of open skies. The Phoenicians built their identity upon the sea. The Israelites wove theirs through memory and covenant. The Greeks formed early communities that would one day become cities. Each culture added its own notes to the calm, ongoing melody of the Iron Age world. As the Iron Age ripened across the landscapes of Europe, the Near East, the Mediterranean, and Asia, the world's craftsmen and artisans quietly shaped a new era. Though kings and warriors often fill historical memory, it was the hands of makers, smiths who forged glowing metal, potters who shaped clay, carpenters who carved wood, weavers who spun wool, and artists who etched stories into stone that truly carried civilization forward. Their work, performed slowly, steadily, and often anonymously, formed the texture of everyday life. In this era, craftsmanship was not performed in bustling factories or under the pressure of mass production. It was intimate, sensory, and tied to the rhythm of human breath. Each object was shaped with purposeful attention. Each tool or vessel carried the touch of the person who made it. And because iron, clay, wood, and wool were woven into daily tasks, these materials grounded the Iron Age world in a quiet harmony of labor and tradition. Among all Iron Age craftsmen, the smith held a unique position. Working with iron required skill, patience, and deep familiarity with fire's behavior. In countless villages, the forge became a place of steady ritual, a space where glowing embers hummed with heat, where sparks leapt gently into the dimness, and where a steady rhythm of hammering echoed through the dawn or dusk. The process began with iron ore, reddish stones collected from hillsides or riverbeds. These stones were crushed, sorted, and prepared for smelting. The furnace, made of clay, reinforced with straw, heated slowly as charcoal burned. Bellows made from leather and wooden frames fed oxygen into the fire, raising the temperature until the ore softened. In this glow, impurities separated from the metal in a slow dance of heat and transformation. The smith worked with practiced precision. He heated the iron, turned it with tongs, and hammered it on an anvil, folding, stretching, and shaping it. Each tap of the hammer helped align the metal's internal structure, making it stronger and more resilient. Though weapons were sometimes made, the smith's main work supported everyday life. Plow tips, sickles, knives, chisels, awls, hinges, nails, and countless small objects, essential to farming and building. The sound of hammering was never harsh in the Iron Age village. It was rhythmic, steady, and familiar, a calming heartbeat that marked the presence of a skilled craftsman continuing the ancient tradition of working with fire and stone. Iron tools subtly transformed the world. Soil could be tilled more deeply, trees could be cut more efficiently, stone could be shaped with greater precision. These changes did not appear dramatic to the people of the time, yet they influenced every meal, every harvest, and every home built across the Iron Age landscape. Clay had been central to human life for millennia. And in the Iron Age, pottery continued to express both artistic identity and everyday necessity. Potters worked in quiet workshops filled with the earthy scent of wet clay. Wheels spun slowly, guided by hands that moved with smooth confidence. Clay vessels took shape. Bowls for meals, jugs for water, jars for storing grain, lamps for gentle evening light. Iron tools, thin blades, wires, and chisels allowed potters to refine their work with new precision. Once shaped, pots dried in shaded courtyards. Later, they were fired in kilns, fueled by wood or charcoal. The process required careful timing. Too much heat might crack the vessel. Too little would leave it fragile. Pottery styles varied widely across regions. In Greece, geometric patterns, spirals, lines, circles, decorated vessels with understated elegance. In the Levant, pottery often featured simple, functional shapes with warm, red-brown surfaces. In the Celtic world, pottery was hand-built with textured surfaces that echoed the patterns of nature. In Anatolia, potters used iron-rich clay that produced deep red or black hues. In China, the Zhou dynasty potters created ritual vessels with graceful forms and subtle ornamentation. Regardless of location, pottery served as the quiet foundation of home life. Meals were stored, carried, and shared from vessels shaped with patience. Lamps illuminated rooms with soft light. Jars lined storerooms with the promise of sustenance throughout winter months. Each vessel held the imprint of the maker's hand, a small mark of human presence preserved in fired earth. Woodworking flourished in the Iron Age thanks to new iron saws, chisels, and drills. Carpenters created beams, furniture, wagons, doors, storage chests, and tools used across all aspects of life. Their workshops smelled of fresh-cut timber, oak, pine, cedar, cypress, or local varieties depending on region. Iron chisels allowed them to carve joints that fit seamlessly. Iron saws created clean edges for beams used in construction. Mortise and tenon joinery, refined through generations, allowed buildings to stand strong even through changing seasons. In homes, wooden objects filled daily spaces. Stools and low tables, carved spoons, bowls, and ladles. Loom frames used for weaving, handles for iron tools, storage chests with simple ornamentation. Carpenters also worked closely with shipbuilders in coastal regions. In Phoenician cities, Greek harbors, and Anatolian ports, carpenters reinforced hulls, shaped masts, and helped build the sturdy vessels that carried the world's trade. Their work, though rarely recognized, made the quiet movement of goods across seas possible. Weaving was central to Iron Age domestic life. Women, and sometimes men, worked at upright looms made of wood, with weights holding the warp threads in place. They spun wool, flax, or plant fibers into yarn, dyeing it with natural pigments extracted from leaves, roots, and minerals. Color palettes varied. Deep reds from madder root, soft yellows from safflower, blues from woad or indigo, browns from earth and bark. Textiles served countless functions: clothing, blankets, sacks for grain, rugs, and ceremonial garments. Patterns were often simple but carried symbolic meaning. Lines representing order, waves representing water, diamonds symbolizing protection. The act of weaving itself created a soothing rhythm. Hands moved back and forth, guiding the shuttle through threads. The wooden frame creaked softly. Each finished cloth represented hours of quiet patience and focused labor. Though iron became the primary tool material, stone remained central to Iron Age architecture, sculpture, and domestic objects. Stoneworkers carved hearthstones, millstones, grinding slabs, and countertops used in kitchens and workshops. In some regions, such as Anatolia and Greece, stoneworkers carved reliefs or small statues for shrines. Iron chisels made stone carving more efficient, allowing for more detailed textures and smoother surfaces. Yet despite these new tools, the fundamental connection between stonework and nature remained intact. Craftsmen chose stones based on weight, color, and grain, often selecting pieces that harmonized with the local landscape. Leather remained essential for clothing, footwear, harnesses, belts, and protective coverings. Iron knives allowed cleaner cuts, while iron awls pierced holes more effectively for stitching. Leatherworkers soaked hides in tannins derived from tree bark and leaves. Once treated, the hides became tough, supple, and long-lasting. In nomadic cultures, such as the Scythians, leatherworking formed a core part of daily life. Saddles, bridles, and protective garments all depended on the skill of craftsmen working with iron tools. Iron Age art reflected both innovation and memory. Much of it was small, intimate, and deeply connected to community identity. Bronze or iron fibulae used as clothing fasteners, carved wooden figurines, painted pottery vessels, jewelry made of bronze, iron, or gold, small idols representing protective spirits, patterns woven into clothing or cut into metal. Though simple compared to the monumental art of some Bronze Age cultures, Iron Age artistic expression held quiet beauty. It relied on clean lines, natural materials, and designs inspired by animals, plants, and celestial patterns. Across regions, craftsmen developed methods unique to their environment: iron forging, heating metal until it glowed, hammering and folding, quenching in water or oil, tempering for strength. Pottery firing, kiln stacking, controlled airflow, temperature observation through color, weaving, warp-weighted looms, spindle spinning, natural dyeing. Woodworking, mortise and tenon joints, carved beams, framed roofs, stone carving, point chisels, tooth chisels, polishing with sand. These techniques required no written manuals. Knowledge passed gently from elder to apprentice, from parent to child, woven into the lived experience of each generation. Through their steady hands, Iron Age craftsmen shaped a world of small but meaningful beauty. Tools that harvested fields, vessels that held food, homes that sheltered families, ships that crossed seas, altars that held offerings, garments that warmed bodies, symbols that carried spiritual meaning. Their work formed the backbone of Iron Age society. They transformed raw earth, ore, plant, and stone into the objects that allowed life to unfold in comfort, safety, and connection. And though their names are rarely known, their quiet mastery remains imprinted upon the archaeological traces of the era. A gentle reminder that the heart of civilization rests in the hands of those who create. As the Iron Age reached its middle centuries, the world began to reorganize itself into new shapes. Old kingdoms faded into memory. New centers emerged with quiet determination. These were not the thunderous empires of later ages, but early forms, stepping stones between ancient Bronze Age traditions and the classical civilizations yet to come. Their expansion was often gradual, carried not only through military strength, but through culture, trade, and the steady work of administration. Across the Near East, Africa, Europe, and Asia, distinct regions developed into influential powers. While each took its own path, they shared the quiet, underlying unity of the Iron Age. Communities grounded in tradition, strengthened by iron tools, and guided by spiritual continuity. In northern Mesopotamia, the city of Assur stood as one of the oldest continuously inhabited religious centers in the region. During the early Iron Age, the Assyrians began to reorganize themselves, drawing upon ancient traditions of writing, trade, and temple administration. Their rise was not sudden. It unfolded across generations, shaped by careful planning and the gradual strengthening of small communities along the Tigris River. The Neo-Assyrian polity that emerged during the Iron Age was known for many qualities: organized governance, strong agricultural production, and a disciplined administrative system. While later Assyrian history includes dramatic military expansion, the early Iron Age moment was quieter, defined more by consolidation, irrigation development, and the slow building of internal strength. Scholars, scribes, and administrators worked in the shadow of temples, recording harvests, trade agreements, and legal matters on clay tablets. These tablets, shaped with styluses of bone or bronze, preserved knowledge stretching back to the dawn of writing. In these early Iron Age centuries, the Assyrians wove their past into new forms of governance, setting the stage for future expansion. Villages along the Tigris thrived through steady agricultural production supported by iron tools. Irrigation canals, maintained with communal labor, ensured reliable harvests even during dry seasons. Markets grew in Assur, Nimrud, and surrounding towns. Goods from Anatolia, the Levant, and Babylonia passed through Assyrian territories, connecting the region to the broader Iron Age world. Assyrian religion remained centered on the god Ashur, whose presence symbolized order and continuity. Rituals honored him in temples built from mud brick, timber, and stone, structures that blended simplicity with spiritual gravity. Priests, adorned with garments woven in early Iron Age style, performed ceremonies that echoed the rhythms of ancient Mesopotamian civilization. Though the Neo-Assyrian Empire would later become renowned for its vast reach, in these early centuries, its identity remained grounded in careful stewardship of land, tradition, and community. Far to the east, in the river valleys of ancient China, the Zhou dynasty shaped one of the most influential ironworking cultures of the era. Their emergence marked a transition from the earlier Shang world, carrying forward traditions while refining philosophical principles that would guide Chinese civilization for centuries. The Zhou governed through the concept of the mandate of heaven, a belief that rulers held authority only if they governed with virtue, justice, and ritual propriety. This idea, gentle yet powerful, emphasized harmony between the human world and the cosmic order. It encouraged rulers to act with humility and responsibility, and it gave communities a moral framework that transcended political change. Zhou architecture reflected this emphasis on harmony. Palaces, ancestor halls, and ritual platforms were arranged according to principles of balance, orientation, and seasonal awareness. Iron tools allowed carpenters and builders to create stronger beams, deeper foundations, and more precise joinery. Yet the aesthetic remained simple, functional, and connected to nature. Ritual bronzes continued to play an essential role in Zhou society. Though iron was increasingly used for tools and weapons, bronze retained its place in ceremonial vessels, ding cauldrons, gui bowls, and zun cups. These objects, cast with intricate motifs, symbolized lineage, reverence, and continuity with ancestors. The Zhou also maintained structured agricultural communities. Families worked fields in patterns organized by seasonal cycles. Wheat, millet, and rice grew in well-tended plots, supported by iron plows and tools that increased productivity. The social fabric of the Zhou world rested upon these rural communities. Villages arranged around family lines, small shrines, and communal halls. Throughout this period, Zhou scholars and storytellers refined early philosophical ideas. The seeds of later Confucian and Taoist traditions lay in these calm Iron Age centuries, shaped by reflections on order, nature, family, and moral conduct. Though these philosophies would flourish later, their origins were already quietly rooted in Zhou life. South of Egypt, the kingdom of Kush developed into a strong Iron Age civilization centered around the upper reaches of the Nile in Nubia. The Kushites inherited rich traditions from earlier African kingdoms while forming their own unique identity. The landscape of Kush, broad river plains, desert horizons, and rocky outcrops, supported communities who lived by farming, herding, fishing, and trade. Iron tools helped shape their agriculture, allowing them to cultivate sorghum, barley, and other crops. Skilled artisans worked with gold, ivory, and stone, creating objects that reflected the deep cultural heritage of Nubia. The Kushites built cities along the Nile, with palaces, temples, and administrative buildings constructed from mud brick and stone. Their architecture often blended Egyptian influences with local styles. Temples featured pylons, columns, and sanctuaries dedicated to gods such as Amun, while also honoring Nubian deities tied to the land, fertility, and kingship. Burial practices in Kush included tumulus graves and, later, pyramids with steep sides distinct from those of Egypt. These structures reflected a belief in the continuity of life beyond death, echoing spiritual traditions that stretched far into Africa's past. Trade connected Kush to Egypt, the Red Sea, and farther regions of sub-Saharan Africa. Gold, incense, animal skins, and exotic goods flowed northward, while pottery, tools, and fabrics traveled southward. The rhythm of this exchange strengthened Kush's position as an essential link between Africa and the Mediterranean world. Throughout these early Iron Age centuries, Kush remained a guardian of ancient traditions, a kingdom shaped by the river's steady pulse and enriched by the quiet resilience of its people. While the Phoenicians had long been seafarers, the Middle Iron Age marked a new phase of their maritime presence, the establishment of far-reaching colonies. Their expansion was not driven by conquest, but by trade, opportunity, and the steady need for new harbors to support increasingly active sea routes. Carthage, founded by settlers from Tyre, became the most significant of these new cities. Located along the North African coast, Carthage grew into a vibrant hub of commerce. Its harbors, carefully constructed with stone, timber, and iron fittings, welcomed ships from across the Mediterranean. Markets filled with goods from interior Africa, southern Spain, Sicily, Sardinia, and faraway Cyprus. Phoenician artisans brought their craft traditions with them: glassmaking, metalwork, textile production, and the famous purple dye. Temples dedicated to Tanit and Baal formed the spiritual center of Carthaginian life. In these sacred spaces, incense drifted in the air, and rituals tied the community to its homeland while honoring the new lands that sheltered them. The spread of the Phoenician alphabet along trading routes became one of the most subtle yet enduring legacies of the Iron Age. Its simplicity and practicality led neighboring cultures to adapt it, shaping literacy across the Mediterranean and influencing writing systems for generations to come. In the hill country of the southern Levant, early Israelite and Judahite kingdoms continued to form their identities through farming, local trade, and shared spiritual traditions. Iron tools aided agriculture, enabling families to cultivate terraced hillsides and maintain olive groves and vineyards with greater efficiency. These kingdoms built fortified towns known as Celts on elevated ground. Their walls were constructed of stone and mud brick, strengthened by iron tools that carved stone blocks with care. Administrative buildings, storage facilities, and small temples formed the centers of these towns, reflecting growing political organization. Spiritual life remained rooted in sacred stories, songs, and community rituals. The oral traditions of these people began to take written form during this period, preserving teachings that emphasized ethical conduct, community identity, and connection to the divine. Though modest compared to later monarchies, these early Iron Age kingdoms laid important foundations for the cultural and religious developments that would shape the region's future. In the Aegean world, the early Iron Age had begun with scattered villages. But over the centuries, communities gradually reorganized themselves into larger, more interconnected settlements. Agricultural production increased, trade routes revived, sanctuaries attracted pilgrimages. Slowly, the first forms of the Greek polis, the city-state, emerged. Each polis developed its own identity, shaped by local geography, myths, and traditions. Athens grew among hills and fertile valleys. Corinth emerged near natural harbors. Sparta organized around the river Eurotas. Megara, Argos, and Thebes formed their own centers of influence. These communities maintained small councils, assemblies, and local officials who guided civic affairs. Temples began to expand gradually, though still humble compared to later structures. Iron tools supported construction and craftwork, laying foundations, literal and cultural, for the classical age. Pottery evolved in style, storytelling through painted scenes. Poets carried oral traditions from one gathering to another. Ritual festivals celebrated local gods, seasons, and community memory. Through these simple processes, the early Greeks began shaping a cultural identity that would someday echo across history. The Iron Age world was not dominated by a single empire or cultural sphere. Instead, it was a mosaic of growing powers. The Neo-Assyrians refining administration, the Zhou cultivating harmony and order, the Kushites shaping a strong African kingdom, the Phoenicians expanding through the sea, the Israelites developing regional identity, the Greeks organizing into early city-states, the Celts, Scythians, and many others building rich local cultures. Each region moved at its own pace, yet all shared a common truth. Iron, though simple in appearance, quietly supported these expansions. It strengthened tools, shaped architecture, and allowed communities to grow with resilience. Through trade, ritual, craftsmanship, and storytelling, the Iron Age world expanded in gentle waves, setting the stage for the empires, philosophies, and arts that would define the centuries to come. As the Iron Age progressed through its long, unhurried centuries, the foundations of a new world began to take shape. Not abruptly, not with sudden change, but with the slow, inevitable turning of time. Fields continued to flourish under the guidance of skilled farmers. Rivers carried boats laden with pottery, grain, and woven goods. Temples echoed with ritual songs that honored ancestors and the unseen forces guiding life. Villages grew into towns, towns into regional centers, and regional centers into the first shapes of states that would one day be recognized as classical civilizations. The Iron Age did not end with a single event. Instead, it dissolved gently into the dawn of new cultures, new political forms, and new philosophies. Throughout this transition, the rhythms of daily life remained constant, grounded in tradition, community, and the enduring connection between humans and the earth. The people living in these centuries did not know they were approaching the threshold of an age that later historians would celebrate as classical. They simply lived, worked, worshipped, and dreamed as generations had always done. And in this calm unfolding, the Iron Age quietly prepared the world for the civilizations that would follow. In Mesopotamia, the Neo-Assyrian world, which had begun with gentle administrative organization, grew more structured with time. Villages expanded into cities whose walls rose higher each generation. Temples continued to serve as centers of ritual and record-keeping, their courtyards filled with the faint scent of burning incense. Scribes recorded agricultural yields, contracts, hymns, and histories onto clay tablets, preserving memory across centuries. Though later centuries would bring periods of conquest, the gentle early Middle Iron Age moment was defined by careful cultivation of the land and the strengthening of civic order. By the time classical empires appeared, the groundwork for organized bureaucracy, road networks, and trade regulation had long been laid by these quiet administrators and farmers. To the south, Babylon maintained its ancient identity, woven from rich religious tradition and the cultural legacy of earlier civilizations. Temples to Marduk, Ishtar, and Nebo remained centers of intellectual life. Scholars studied celestial patterns, agricultural cycles, and medicinal practices. As iron tools improved building efficiency, temples and city walls were repaired and expanded, preparing Babylon for its later classical flourishing under Nebuchadnezzar. In the southern Levant, the early Iron Age kingdoms of Israel, Judah, Moab, and Edom experienced slow growth. While political stories would become more dramatic in later centuries, the early period was one of quiet consolidation. Families cultivated terraced hillsides, tended olive groves, and worked vineyards passed down through generations. The spiritual world of these communities deepened. Oral traditions evolved into written texts. Songs, laws, stories, and ethical teachings began to take literary form. These writings would eventually shape major religious traditions, but their early formation occurred in peaceful domestic settings, in lamplit rooms, in village gatherings, and during slow, rhythmic recitations around the hearth. To the northwest, the Phoenicians continued their maritime life. Their colonies, Carthage above all, grew organically. Markets expanded, workshops refined their crafts. Through trade, the Phoenicians connected the Near East to Greece, Egypt, Cyprus, and the Western Mediterranean. In doing so, they quietly seeded the cultural exchanges that would influence the rise of classical Greece and Rome. In the Aegean, the early Iron Age had begun with humble villages recovering from the collapse of Mycenaean palace systems. Over time, these communities grew increasingly interconnected. Trade revived, linking coastal towns and islands. Shrines on hilltops attracted regional gatherings. Festivals developed into occasions for poetry recitations, athletic games, and ritual offerings. As generations passed, the Greek polis, the city-state, emerged from this quiet foundation. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, Argos, and dozens of smaller communities gradually took shape. Their growth was not sudden, It unfolded as people reorganized their social and political structures around shared identity and local tradition. Temples began as wooden structures, maybe just simple porches sheltering stone altars. Over time, iron tools allowed stonemasons to carve more refined shapes. Houses gained more rooms, marketplaces widened. The first civic buildings emerged. Oral poetry, carried from village to village by bards, began to coalesce into the great epics that would later define Greek literature. The classical world we recognize today grew quietly from these early Iron Age villages, built stone by stone, story by story, through the calm work of generations. In the forested heart of Europe, the Celtic world continued to develop. Small Iron Age communities grew into fortified hill forts, known as oppida. These settlements, though far from the monumental cities of Greece or the Near East, represented sophisticated networks of craft, trade, and ritual. Celts became renowned for their metalwork, fine iron swords, beautifully decorated bronze torques, and intricate patterns of spirals and knots. Their art expressed the flowing lines of nature, vines, waves, animals, and celestial motifs. As ironworking advanced, the Celts expanded into new territories, moving quietly across Europe, settling along rivers, valleys, and plains. Their culture was deeply communal. Festivals tied to harvests and solstices brought families together. Storytellers preserved memories of ancestors, gods, and heroic journeys. Sacred groves served as temples without walls, where offerings were left beneath oak trees and beside clear streams. By the later Iron Age, the Celts formed one of the most widespread cultural networks in ancient Europe, an influence that would later shape Roman and medieval traditions, though its roots lay in centuries of gentle daily life. South of the Mediterranean, civilizations across the African interior developed their own Iron Age traditions. The Kingdom of Kush remained a vibrant center of culture, forging connections through trade and ritual. Farther west, in regions that would later become the Sahelian kingdoms, ironworking supported agriculture, toolmaking, and local leadership. These early African Iron Age societies were often rural, organized around clans and elders. Fields of millet and sorghum grew in rhythmic cycles. Iron axes cleared land, iron hoes tilled soil. Ceramics developed unique patterns, often geometric or symbolic. Wood carvers shaped masks and figures that connected the physical world to the spiritual. Though their names are less known today, these communities laid the groundwork for future African kingdoms famed for their art, governance, and trade. Their cultures grew through continuity, adapting iron technology at their own pace, shaping societies that harmonized with their environment. Across the steppe, the Scythians and related nomadic peoples refined their skills in horsemanship and archery. Their mastery of movement allowed them to maintain a stable, mobile society. Herds of horses, sheep, and cattle formed the backbone of steppe life. Yurts, portable and warm, allowed communities to move with the seasons. The Scythians perfected composite bows and iron-tipped arrows. Their art, animal motifs carved in gold, bronze, and bone, reflected a deep reverence for the natural world. Burial mounds marking the resting places of their leaders held finely crafted objects. Weapons, jewelry, and textiles that revealed a world rich in symbolism. Though nomadic cultures often remain less visible in historical chronicles, their presence shaped ancient Eurasia profoundly. They connected distant regions through movement, trade, and cultural exchange. Their mobility linked China, Persia, and the Mediterranean, quietly influencing the developments of settled civilizations. In the Indo-Gangetic Plains, Iron Age communities shaped agricultural and spiritual landscapes that would endure for millennia. Iron plows transformed river valleys into fertile stretches capable of supporting larger populations. Villages grew near fields and rivers, their structures built from mud brick, wood, and thatch. Vedic rituals continued, performed around sacred fires by families and priests. Hymns, memorized and recited across generations, celebrated cosmic order, moral duty, and the timeless relationships between humanity and the divine. As iron tools expanded agricultural possibilities, settlements grew into towns, quietly setting the stage for the early urban states of northern India. Though philosophical and cultural developments such as the Upanishads lay in the centuries ahead, the foundations of spiritual inquiry and community structure were already present in this gentle interval of Iron Age life. In China, the Zhou dynasty's long Iron Age presence nurtured order, ritual, and reflection. Communities lived in harmony with seasonal rhythms, honoring ancestors and cultivating fields of millet and rice. Iron tools supported agricultural expansion, building projects, and the crafting of daily necessities. In village compounds, families lived in courtyard houses arranged according to kinship ties. In larger regional centers, administrative buildings organized labor and resources. Ritual vessels, bronze but increasingly complemented by iron tools, connected families to their ancestors and to the cosmic order that shaped Zhou thought. During the later centuries of the Iron Age, philosophical reflections deepened. Ideas about governance, ethics, nature, harmony, and balance began to take refined shape. Though the famous thinkers of classical China would emerge later, their roots lay in the quiet order of these Iron Age centuries. By the later Iron Age, the world had become an intricate mosaic. Local cultures strengthening their identities, new states emerging from older traditions, trade networks weaving continents together, rituals preserving ancient spiritual continuity, iron tools shaping agriculture, architecture, and art, oral traditions preparing to become literature, small settlements preparing to become cities. This was not a time of sudden transformation. It was a period of preparation, a long, quiet inhalation before the exhale of classical civilizations. The foundations for Greece's classical era, Rome's ascent, Persia's Achaemenid Empire, India's early states, and China's philosophical flowering were all laid gently in these centuries of steady Iron Age life. Families rose with the sun, worked the land, shaped goods, honored their gods, and passed on knowledge through the warmth of hearth fire and the rhythm of tradition. Empires and philosophies would someday rise from these ordinary rhythms. But the heart of the Iron Age belonged to people whose names were never recorded. Farmers, potters, weavers, smiths, shepherds, shipbuilders, and storytellers. Their labor built the world that lay ahead. Their traditions carried the memory of the past. Their quiet endurance shaped the future. And so, the Iron Age did not end. It simply transformed, softly, gradually, seamlessly, into a new dawn. A dawn filled with cities, philosophies, and new stories, but always rooted in the calm, enduring human heart.